everybody, and welcome to this If Oxford event, The Science of Gin Tasting. I've been looking forward to this one for a little while. I think it's going to be a good event. It's day 23 of the festival, and we've got just over a week to go. I feel a bit like a slightly boozy David Attenborough at the moment with all these plants, but obviously there's context for the botanics and also the gin. The way that this event's going to run is that we'll be having conversations between the Botanic Garden folks and the people at Toad. All the way through the event. Please, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please put them in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. Meanwhile, it's a pleasure to get my drinks all in order and welcome the people from the Botanic Garden, and mainly your host for tonight, Lauren. So, Lauren, over to you.
Hi Dane, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us this evening. We're really excited to share our love of gin with you. I would like to introduce the rest of the panel who are going to be talking us through all of the wonders this evening. First of all, Simon Hiscock from the Oxford Botanic Garden, Director of the Oxford Botanic Garden, is with us this evening. And Master Distiller at the Oxford Artisan Distillery, Corey Mason, is here as well. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Simon, who is going to do a short introduction to the Oxford Botanic Garden. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Lauren. And just to reiterate Lauren's welcome to the evening. It's a pleasure to have so many of you joining us to celebrate our love of plants and our love of the botanicals that we put into gin, and particularly our Oxford Physic gin. And this is a bit of a celebration of a wonderful collaboration between the Oxford Botanic Garden and the Oxford Artisan Distillery that started well over 5 years ago now, and it's blossomed, and we're creating all sorts of wonderful ideas as well beyond Physic gin, but a bit of that will come later. I'd like to start by just introducing you to Oxford Botanic Garden. The Botanic Garden here at Oxford is the oldest in the UK. It was founded in 1621 with a £5,000 donation by Henry Danvers, 1st Earl of Danby, who wanted, having travelled in Europe and particularly Italy, to establish a physic garden in Oxford, in the UK generally, because having seen the grand gardens, Renaissance gardens in Padua, Pisa and the like, thought that Britain should have such a garden for the teaching of medicinal plants. So in 1621, he founded the garden for the teaching of medicine in Oxford. And of course, our Physic gin takes its name from that Physic garden tradition. And of course, gin has medicinal properties, and was actually created as a medicine by the Dutch, Ginevra, for treating their overseas colonials for fevers. So gin is medicine, Botanic Garden is medicine, and medicinal plants are the basis of our modern medicines. So there's a nice theme running through there. The garden, having been founded with this donation, was then prepared for planting. Many of you will know that if the Botanic Garden is situated right next to the Cherwell on a floodplain, so a lot of the initial money was spent raising the level of the land around there. The university scavenger, an unusual post, and not one that exists necessarily today, was tasked with raising the level, and he brought in 4,500 wagon loads of muck and dung to raise the level. and other monies were spent building the wall. So it wasn't until about 1640 that we actually got to, or Jacob Bobart, the first keeper, started to plant the garden properly. And Bobart was an unusual man in many respects, and has something in common with me, because he was a licensee of the Greyhound Tavern that once existed on just off the High Street, and he subsidized his poor remuneration for running the garden from his income from the Greyhound Tavern. And then nearly 400 years later, I am the next licensee to be holding charge of the Botanic Garden, because we have got the Botanic Garden licensed now for the sale of Physic gin. And it's a nice sort of circle of events that started with Physic, with medicine, with a licensee, and now, as we approach our 400th anniversary in 2021, we have the Botanic Garden licensed to sell this wonderful gin. And I think that sort of sums up where we are. So I could hand over to Corey perhaps now, and Lauren.
It's back to me quickly.
Before that, and then we can get going and telling you a bit about the botanicals and how we got to create this wonderful product. So over to you, Lauren. Thank you.
Yeah, just before I do hand over and unleash the botanical wonders of the gin, I have a video to share with you all this evening, because as part of our gin tastings that we do at the garden, we love to usually show off the physical gin beds. At the moment, we obviously can't take you all around the gin beds. It's a bit dark for one. So I caught up with the curator of the garden, Mark Brent, last week, and he agreed to give us a couple minutes of his time and tell us about the gin beds and point out a few of his favourite plants as well. So.
Beds were first planted in 2018, so they're relatively recent in the life of a 400-year-old botanical garden. However, they fit the historical narrative of the garden perfectly. The garden itself was planted ostensibly to sort of demonstrate the botanical diversity and physical properties of plants. In this instance, we're exploiting the plants here in the gin border for more pleasurable reasons. There are 25 botanicals chosen, so 25 different plants that have been carefully selected from Jacob Bobart's 17th century catalogue of plants within the garden. And we've tried to use a selection of those for the production of the gin. The spring and summer is usually the best time to view the gin borders. But some of our plants can be seen year-round, such as citrus, which are always on display in or around the conservatories. Other plants that look particularly good at this time of the year are things like Szechuan pepper and also our Japanese bitter orange, Poncirus trifoliata, which can be found in the walled garden. In the autumn, one of the botanical highlights of the garden is actually Humanus lupulus, or hop. And believe it or not, more frequently associated with beer, there are one of the 25 botanicals that go in Oxford Physic gin, and they can be found growing in the Plants That Change the World section of our garden, which is adjacent to the gin border.
There we are. I hope that was it was very clear on my screen. I do apologize if it was a bit jumpy on anybody's, but the perils of Zoom video sharing. So yeah, that was a brief introduction to our gin borders at the garden. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to Simon and Corey to take us through what we're all really here for this evening.
Right, well, shall I kick off, Corey?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you have the history of the whole project. I just have the booze of the project. So it'd be amazing if you could, give us a little bit about the garden and history.
As Mark, the curator, just pointed out in that little tour of the garden, the heart of our gin is really the first list of plants that were grown, cultivated at the Botanic Garden, that was published in 1648 by Jacob Bobart the Elder. And all but one of the botanicals in our gin, there are 25, is on that list. And we've checked, and those are all there. And importantly, there was juniper, which is, of course, as Corey will tell you about, the heart of a good gin, Genevra, and other key botanicals. But the one ingredient that isn't on that list that we had to include is the wonderful Szechuan pepper, which has been grown for over 100 years in the Botanic Garden, but it's one of the ones we harvest and include in the gin. And so it's all about this list, which is the first list of plants ever cultivated in the UK in a physic garden, a botanic garden. And that is the heart and soul of physic gin. And the motifs on the label are all taken, and the fonts are all taken from that published list of 1648. So that's where it all comes from. That's the heart of the gin. And it was 5 years ago that I first, or 6 years even, that I first met Tom Nicholson and Corey and Tagore, who are the founders of the Oxford Artisan Distillery, because I came to Oxford that time ago to run the Botanic Garden, and I already made the decision that I wanted to work with somebody to a distillery to create a gin, because of the history and approaching the 400th anniversary and all that celebratory stuff that we're going to do next year. And Tom was just about to set up this distillery, and we got brought together by the wonderful medium the medium of a pub landlord who also had the name of Tom, who runs the Punters on Osney Island. And I was talking to him one day and saying that I was coming back to Oxford, having lived once on Osney Island before going to Bristol, and I wanted to create this gin. And he said, I know just the chap who can help you. His name's Tom as well, Tom Nicholson. He's just about to found this distillery, and he put us in touch. And that's how I met Tom. That's how I met Corey, the genius that created, the alchemist that created physic gin, and Tagore, and the rest is sort of history. And we all clicked immediately because we all wanted to do this gin. So Corey.
Absolutely, man. That brings me back. I mean, we all clicked because we wanted a gin. I think we also all clicked because we also really enjoyed Negronis. I remember quite a few of these early meetings we had were always held at a bar and always with a good drink. It is really fun to come full circle with this after starting this project with you, because you were actually instrumental in us starting the distillery and wondering what it was. So when I came onto this project, it was doing a distillery in Oxford, and what does Oxford represent? And as a gin distiller, so I've been distilling gin for, over 10, 15 years now. You look at plants, you look at flavor, and you look at story, and those things are all kind of intertwined. The plants, the area, they tell the story to create the product you want. And we're in Oxford and we're creating this amazing distillery. And all of a sudden we have this asset. We have this historical asset, which is the oldest living, place that grows the most amazing plants in the world. And it's on our doorstep, and we're looking to make a gin. And the purpose of a gin is really, it's to express botanicals. And so many products out there, so many gins out there, you almost have to create your story to back up your marketing. For us, we're like, we have the oldest botanical garden in the world. We have a book that had the original plantings of it. And for me as a gin distiller, I'm like, this is amazing. Like, we have the ingredients to make an amazing product that's never been made, that has historical significance, that can represent a story that we can then put out to the world that represents Oxford as well. And I think that's what we did really well with this whole project. I mean, before we even had a distillery, I was walking around Oxford Botanic Gardens with some scissors and a carrier bag, taking samples, snipping botanicals, smelling it with my hands, figuring out what worked. I probably took 80, almost 100 different plant samples, and then brought them back to,
I remember it well, Cora, and you having the nerve to taste a raw Szechuan pepper, which I've got here.
Yeah, I have some too. We were at the Botanic Gardens. Michael, one of our distillers, she was at the Botanic Gardens this morning harvesting the botanicals, because it's not only a marketing story. We literally take the plants from the garden and turn them into a gin that people can enjoy, and that hopefully represents, the ethos and the story of the Botanic Gardens. It's the story of Oxford. It's our story, but it's also a journey you take with the tastes. I mean, it represents the botanicals. It's the physical representation of these plants that you see behind us, and I just felt so lucky. I almost felt like I was cheating. Like, most people, like I said, have to create a story and order botanicals. Here I am walking around the oldest, in the UK, one of the oldest in the world, libraries of plants. And I just get to taste and smell and distill and use that as my recipe. And I personally, after making gin for a long time, you follow these routes. I learned more making physic about distilling and flavor than I've learned from anything else, because it took us into all these different avenues. You take plants that you've never thought would be good in gin, and you see what they feel like and taste like in a still, and what comes over, and then you integrate that into a recipe. And it was just, looking through Bobart's book, looking through an almost 400-year-old small book of botanicals, and picking things out of it that haven't been used but were medicinal. It was like opening up a whole new avenue for gin making for me, which was really, really interesting. And I think to date, it's one of the things that I'm most proud of that I've ever made at the distillery, for sure. And one of the things I actually drink probably some of here.
We're so pleased we were able to team up with you, Corey, as I've referred to you, the alchemist. You seem to be able to, and this is what struck me, was go around and actually taste these sort of raw fruits, these raw bits of plant, and then have an idea what they would taste like after they'd been distilled. And that's a bit of a genius. I never sort of seen that in anyone.
I think I love doing this
you weren't afraid to taste that, to have a suck on that Szechuan pepper, which anesthetized your tongue, didn't it?
It does. I've got some back here. But the beauty of distilling, and for me, personally, and this is why I love doing this at a science festival, because I've always been a science geek. I've been a big science nerd my whole life. And I've also been a bartender, and I also really enjoy a good drink, and I think it's this perfect medium here where you get to combine botany and science and fluid dynamics and physics and all of these things, and the end result is actually a really good drink. Like, it ties all of these things together. And when you're tasting things in the garden, it really is. It's, when I'm tasting Szechuan pepper, for instance, I'm tasting it, and yes, your mouth goes numb, it buzzes, everyone goes, oh, you can't taste anything. But when you distill it, it's a great example, because when you distill it, that buzziness, the overbearing like mouthfeel doesn't come over. Distilling separates, separates compounds. There's volatilities, there's solubility involved. When you distill it, what comes over is fruit, floral, like beautiful notes, and what stays behind is those things that kill your tongue. So I can taste certain wormwood, gentian, well, a lot of these potatoes, they're bitter and they're rich and they're full, and you would never think they'd work in a gin, but when you know what flavors are left behind, and you know when you distill them in different parameters, you know what you can coax out of them. And that's the interesting thing about the science of it all. It's recognizing what you can take out of it, what you can express, and what you can leave behind through the use of distilling, infusion, all sorts of other things. And that's where it ties together that, that taste and art and science and, just good booze making.
Yeah, and you brought the remit sort of together of what Physic Gin was going to be about, which is basically about a big hit of botanicals, followed by a sort of calming, warming, medicinal quality, which comes through in the gin. As soon as you taste it, there's this big hit, and then this lovely, soothing, medicinal quality. And you nailed it with that. And
I think that's important in any gin. Any gin, I would say, gin. Okay, that you can go online. You can get a recipe for gin. Gin is juniper, citrus, and alcohol. Like gin is easy. What everyone struggles to do is make gin unique, but also make gin tell a story. Every gin distillery has a local botanical or has a local recipe or some old recipe. It has these things that you build up to build up the image of the gin. Now, we were just blessed with the story. Like the story is already there. We have 400 years of growing medicinal herbs. The story was there. The challenge was, how do you take 400 years of medicine, and medicinal herbs, and how do you turn that into a gin that, in one sense, is good to drink, because you're not going to make something that's, tastes like medicine, but also how do you make a gin that actually still tastes like medicine? How do you make a gin that still tastes like medicine in the right way, that the story is told, but you can still enjoy it? And that's why I say I learned a lot from this gin, because it took a long time. It took figuring out how to distill things. It took figuring out how to get the right element of a bitter botanical to be in the gin and be herbal, but not make it undrinkable because it's bitter and medicinal. Yeah. So when I made it, we cross our fingers and we give it to someone and say, wow, it's herbal and medicinal, but good. We knew we did the job right, because that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to represent a medicinal garden, but still be unique and actually enjoyable to drink.
Yeah, but wasn't one of the key things that you did was miss out orris root, which is one of the sort of blending botanicals that sort of brings them all together, but doesn't give the individual note.
It does. Orris is a really good one. It's an interesting one. And my history, my training, I did my master's in distilling at Heriot-Watt, and you do a lot of lab analysis and you do a lot of individual botanical distillations and all these things. And Orris plays this really interesting role where it actually increases and binds together the individual ingredients. Like it lowers volatilities, it brings over higher concentrations of different compounds. When you pull it out, it does change it. Most gins, every gin, pretty much everyone's strength has 5 ingredients. It's juniper, coriander, orris, angelica, and some kind of citrus. But when you take orris out, it does make a huge difference in the balance of the gin. So to not have that in there, because we stayed true to what we agreed to in the beginning, that everything in this gin, every ingredient either was in Bobart's book and has grown historically, or was grown now. So it's either grown in the garden now, or it was grown historically. And orris has not historically or currently been grown in the gardens. So we had to leave it out. And it was a challenge, and it led us down some interesting roads. And I think it ultimately really affected the gin we ended up making, but in a really positive way. With all the gins out there in the world, to make something that's unique, I think is just as important as making something that's, well, not as good, but it's a very important aspect of it.
Yeah, that's exactly why I don't corrupt it with Peruvian bark and put tonic with it, because that isn't a something that necessarily goes into gin, apart from as a sort of dilution. So I will always drink Physic gin neat, because that's the way to appreciate the wonderful botanicals. If you were to put a tonic, which you probably are going to do this evening, what tonic would you put with Physic gin?
I mean, it depends. There's a lot of good ones. Physic is such a unique gin that you can go two ways with it. You can put something very light in it, where you say, okay, this is a very light tonic, where it's the gin shines through. So we use a lot of Fever Tree Light. Or you can find a complementary tonic. You know, so one, I forgot, I'm not gonna plug any. There's been some tonics out there that have a lot of grapefruit. You know, grapefruit's a big note in there, and that comes together well. It's either a lot of flavor that complements it really well, or it's actually very little flavor to let it shine through. But if you get it wrong, it's it's almost, people describe it as Marmite, where if you don't like the individual unique flavors that come through, then you're probably not going to. But the people that do like it, which is most of it, it shines above a lot of things. So it's got to complement it well if you're using a lot of flavor.
Mm.
But I mean, Fever Tree is one we use a lot. Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple others, but
I try not to put any tonic in my Physic. I'll put tonic with some other popular gins, but not Physic. And I just think it all comes through really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's been such a fun one to do, because again, tying this back, you know, we're in a science festival here. You know, hopefully the people that have been attracted to our talk today are not just gin fans, but also science fans. And you know, as you can see, you know, this is actually my lab, and this is where all the recipe development for Physic happened. But as a science project, Physic has been such a really fun one, because it deals with how you express flavor out of the botanicals. Like, none of this ingredient, there's 25 botanicals in here, they don't just all go into the still and we get a great product out. You know, through all of the work we put into making this recipe, we found that there were ingredients in there that you couldn't put into the recipe. You couldn't put it into the still with everything else. With gin botanicals, you know, the goal of any good gin distiller is not actually just to create flavor, it's to separate flavor. Every one of these flavors in these plants we use, these botanicals, has a volatility, it has a solubility. It's how you separate it using alcohol and heat. And some of these products, some of these botanicals, you have to treat them differently. So for Physic, it's the only gin we make that's not a London dry, because we actually have to separate the distillation. We do several different distillations to really get that flavor. So we do a big gin base that's amazing and flavorful, but I pull some of these botanicals out, like the wormwood, like the bay, like the gentian, and I have to distill them in small amounts in the lab here under different conditions to get those different flavors out, you know, and you treat it differently. And then you blend them together. And when you do that, when you treat it right, when you lower the alcohol percentages, when you have different cut points, you get different flavors, and then you can bring them together. So it's not a classic traditional gin. It's a gin that took a lot of science. It's a gin that took a lot of experimentation and a lot of looking into how to coax the best flavors out of any of these plants we're using into something that, you know, that then works with tonic and works with a drink and works, you know, in a gin.
And I love the fact that it has one of my favorite spring flowers in it, the sweet woodruff, which for those of you that walk through woodlands in May and see the lovely floor covering of these dainty, beautiful little white flowers all across native to English woodlands. And that, I mean, to have that in a drink is just,
we got them with your here,
wonderful and evocative. And what is it about, what does sweet woodruff bring?
Let me hear. So I've made a classic mistake that I've always made, and I recognize this because I've been on the other side of it, where you have to listen to somebody talk, myself for a long time, looking at a drink without actually tasting it. So I know we're going to go through the tasting later, but because there's going to be more talking, I would actually invite anyone who's sitting at home to actually crack open your little bottle if you have it and taste it, just because I don't think anyone should have to sit too long for a gin talk without a little bit of a drink. So I'd say if save a bit for the tasting when we do go through them all, but if anyone wants to taste it now, you can put a little bit of the actual flavor to what we're talking about. As far as Woodruff is amazing. Woodruff, sweet Woodruff, it's, now actually thinking about it, I don't know if we can sell this in the US because of the Woodruff. It's got coumarins. It's got these chemicals in here, which Germans have used it for a long time with the Berliner Weiss to make a syrup, to put in this green syrup. It's the chemical, the coumarins in here, they're vanilla, they're rich, they're musky. It's the same compounds that are in Zabrovka vodka, if you've ever had bison grass. It's that sweet grass, herby.
It's the smell of cut grass, you know, when you first cut the grass in the spring.
And that actually, if you get into the whole, like, you know, it's what that does chemically, the sense of calm you get from that. It's a very evocative flavor, and when you dry it, it compounds more and more. And how you get that out without getting the vegetal note is really hard, but it really does. So we use Woodruff. In other gins, we use Meadowsweet that has it. You can use different sweetgrass or Zabrovka. It's also actually the key ingredient. If everyone's ever used Avon Skin So Soft, the one that keeps the mosquitoes away, it's an anti-mosquito. So historically, native populations have used these sweet grasses as a bug repellent, but it's this beautiful smelling compound in there that it gives it, in the gin, it gives it depth, it gives it sweetness. I mean, you can wax poetic and you can talk about gin as a perfume, right? Where you need your different notes. You need your top note of citrus, you need your sweet juniper notes, you need your base notes of, like, you know, this Woodruff, and in this case, in Physic, you need your base notes of like gentian and wormwood and these really deep base notes. But you don't want to taste all those individually. Really, what you want to do is use all of these different notes to create a flavor which is indistinguishable from Physic. You know, that is the flavor of Physic. It's not like, oh, it tastes like juniper and, you know, and Woodruff. No, it's Physic, and Physic has these flavors that come together, and the flavor you go on, you know, crescendos and dips, and it's an experience when you drink it. But you shouldn't be able to say it's that beautiful gentian, bay, and Woodruff gin. It's, you balance them all together, and that's what a lot of the work that went into this one is, how to balance those really unique notes that a lot of, I mean, we have a lot of botanicals in this that aren't used in gin, you know, that aren't in any other gins. So it's been a challenge, and also I would say a big success, and a really amazing journey we've gone on with it.
Yes, and certainly we shall be using it in quantity to celebrate our 400th anniversary next year, because
that's the best part about this. That's the best part about gin, is that after all this work and all this analytical and cerebral and like, oh, we're going to talk about volatilities and all these, and at the end of it, actually, what you've got an amazing bottle of gin, and let's have a drink.
Yeah,
you know, that's the end of the day, and that's what I love about this. It's science and enjoyment and culture and history and all of that combined together into a beautiful drink and a beautiful cocktail.
Definitely, and to build on that, and where we started with our Negronis and the creating of the perfect gin for the perfect Negroni, I've actually taken it to Italy, to Sicily, and made Negronis with my Italian collaborators on my research on Mount Etna, and it does make a Negroni that passes not just the Italian test,
which
but
is
the Sicilian test, and that's a good endorsement of a Negroni, I would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, should we start drinking some with our waiting audience, Corey?
Should we move on to the tasting? Is that where we're?
They've been very patient so far. Yeah, we've had a few people who have dove into the Physic gin, as you suggested, Corey, and so far are very much enjoying it. But excellent. Yeah, if you're ready and you want to start diving into the tasting session, I'm sure more conversation will come flowing out of you as well.
Sure. So
definitely,
For me, I mean, we can't start the tasting without talking a little bit about the distillery and how we got here and what we are, like why are we doing this product and what makes this whole thing unique. And I think that's one of the interesting, things about the Oxford Artisan Distillery is that every aspect of what we've done to bring us here, it's represented in what we do at the Botanic Gardens, but also our ethos at the distillery. And it's also why we're going to start. It's the other one. If everyone wants to start, we're going to start with a vodka because this sums up. Now, I'll be completely honest with everyone here that's listening. I have never been a fan of vodka. Never. I was a bartender in New York for 10 years, and vodka is something you kept under the bar for that person that walked in that didn't have enough taste to like gin, and you'd be like, fine. So that was the challenge here. But really, what you realize is gin is just the best flavored vodka in the world. And if you don't have a good base, then you can't build on that. Any gin comes from pure alcohol and a pure base that you then flavor and redistill. So with our project here with the Oxford Artisan Distillery, our goal was to actually create a distillery that did everything from scratch. So we work with the Botanic Gardens for growing botanicals for this product. We work with an archaeobotanist, John Letts, to grow grain. We grow all of our own grain within 50 miles of the distillery. It's organically grown. We could talk for ages. Let me get sciencey on it. It's organic polycultures of heritage and ancient grains grown together in ecosystems that are creating new land races with no inputs. So we can delve into that later at some time. But what it means is that we're using historical grains grown together, and we do everything from scratch. We grow the grain. We built our own stills with South Devon Railway to make the process. So we ferment on site, we distill into our base on site, and then we use local botanicals when we can to turn that into gin and vodka. But the first thing we do in any of this process is make the vodka. And someone who's not a fan of vodka, I had to make that decision. Like, are we going to make something that's flavorless? Do we filter it a lot? Or do we make something that stands out and actually showcases our grain, our ethos, our handmade aspect of it all? So that's where we went with the vodka. So if anyone wants to taste the vodka, I'm going to crack open my bottle.
It's an absolute cracker, Corey. We're united in that. But what you say about the grains that go into this is an incredible story and is completely unique to Oxford Artisan Distillery.
I'll do the rest of it.
These are
the grain here. We can have the rest of our tasting amongst the field.
Well,
no, so the other thing is, it's not just grain. Coming from the States, being a bartender, I've been a huge fan of rye. And rye for me, it's a hard grain to work with, but it cross-pollinates, it adapts and evolves to its environment, but it has amazing flavor, and it's hard to work with, but you're paid off tenfold in what it gives you if you've gone through that work. So our grain is some of the most genetically diverse fields in the world, and that's a big statement. But that means we replant our seed every year, and every year 100 varieties went in the beginning, but every time we replant them, they cross-pollinate and the genetics change. So our fields evolve. So now there's literally tens of thousands of unique varieties and genetically diverse versions of these grains growing and self-selecting in our fields. So it's as sciencey and as ecological and as evolutionary as you want to get. And again, the result is it makes sustainable, amazing tasting booze. So yeah. It's rye as a base, it's local rye. And yeah, it's a struggle to work with. We're here till 4 a.m. sometimes, chipping away burnt, foaming, grain everywhere. But the trade-off is the flavor, and that comes through in the vodka, right? When you taste the vodka, I don't have a feedback from everyone. Hopefully, everyone at this point is tasting their vodka.
People, you are free to use the chat if you wish to let us know how you're getting on, and I'll feed it in when these guys stop sort of.
So we had a debate with this vodka when I made it, because the way we design the stills and with rye, so it's grain in. It's not single malt where you take the grain out. The grain follows in the fermentation, and the grain is in the still. And when I designed the stills with South Devon, I put a big heat coil in there. So when you put this thick porridge of grain in there, it actually bakes and it cooks onto these coils, and it caramelizes, and it's the Maillard reaction, right? The complex reaction of amino acids and sugars that create these flavors. Okay, it sounds like science. It's the same thing as toasting bread. You know, the difference between bread and toast is a whole lot of flavor and mouthfeel. You know, the difference between a raw steak and a seared steak, you know, my vegan wife is not going to like that, you know, not that I'm eating the steak, okay? But it's that layer of like, you know, that complex flavor that's created around that burning and that caramelization. And we designed the still specifically and the process specifically to take advantage of that. And it showcases, like I said, I don't like vodka, but I really like our vodka because we've taken it somewhere else. So we created something. Vodka's supposed to not taste like anything. It's supposed to be in your freezer and cold. Our vodka is best at warm temperature. It has caramel and malt and chocolate and all these like ridiculously like complex flavors that shouldn't be in a vodka. And
you're not alone in the in not liking vodka, Corey. We've got quite a few people saying that they are not vodka fans, but this vodka is lovely and smooth and caramel flavors, and yeah, they are quite sold on it.
And it's one of those things, you know, when you build a distillery, and one of the amazing parts about this distillery is it was a what if project. Okay, I'm coming out of a couple of distilleries that have been successful. What do we do? What if we just break it down to basics? If you could make whatever you wanted, what would you do? Okay, we do our own stills, we do it this way. So you design this fantasy project and you have these grand hopes that it all works. And then you've got a product you have to create, and you sit there and you cross your fingers and you go, okay, I really hope it all worked. I hope that, you know, this vodka turns out tasting like chocolate and caramel. And it's one of those examples where it did. You know, it came out and everyone's like, this is amazing. We're not going to filter it. And I'm not one for award ceremonies and things like that, but I will say the vodka has won best rye vodka in the world at the world's best for 2 years in a row. So it's, you know, it's not just me really liking it. Apparently other people really like it too.
Yeah, quite rightly so, Corey. Yeah. And what it has is heritage in that flavor, because that goes back to medieval times with the cereals, the rye particularly, that's gone into that.
Oh man, we could spend a whole night on this subject, like with John Letts, the amazing archaeobotanist that we work with.
Yeah.
You know, the whole reason he even grew this grain is because he was doing a study on medieval thatched buildings, and he found grain preserved in the bottom layer of medieval thatched buildings, and he used that grain to make a snapshot of medieval fields, which then he recreated with grains now. You know, so we're making vodka out of a field that represents a medieval field as explained through a thatched roof. I mean,
yeah, and these cereals, these grains would have been not only used for the grains themselves, for the flour, but the stalks would have been the thatch. So it was multi-purpose, rather than the modern cereals that have all been bred to be dwarf varieties.
Oh, if you look at one of our fields, I mean, I'm 6 foot tall, and I walk through our fields, and the grain is as tall as I am. You know, and his whole method of farming is these grains outproduce everything, and you can sow weeds at the bottom. So, I mean, again, we could spend all night talking about John. It's non-rotational crops where you actually undersow nitrogen fixing.
There's no such thing as a weed, Corey.
Nope.
A weed
is a flower in the wrong place.
Growing in the wrong place for humans. These are all part of the biodiversity, all the lovely cornfield flowers that we don't see anymore, that now the government gives some contributions to farmers to grow around the peripheries. These are wonderful things, like the corn cockle, which would have been growing in those medieval fields. They're just part of the whole ecosystem, the biodiversity of these wonderful fields of grain that once clothed this country. And
this is the first time I think that you're actually, you know, when we started this 5 years ago, no one was really talking, organic's fine, but it was really talked about, you know, regenerative farming and biodiversity and all of the rest. Now, I mean, every week we get a little ping from someone, a large drinks company who's now investing in biodiversity, investing in heritage, and all of the rest. You know, and you know, unfortunately, like anything, a lot of it becomes greenwashing. You know, our purpose was never to just market on that. You know, our purpose wasn't good to, oh, we're going to sell a lot of gin because it's this. Our purpose has always been, again, it's this what if project. You know, what if we look at what it takes, like what it takes to make a sustainable distillery, you know? And we met John, and it wasn't because we wanted to sell a lot of booze because it's heritage. It's because we said, this is an amazing way to farm. It's going to create unique flavors. It's going to create ecosystems and biodiverse fields that bring insects. I mean, it's a project that well, you can take pride in it. You know, you can look at it and say, I'm doing something good for the world as well as doing something good to drink. And that was our goal from the beginning.
The panelists are saying, the talk is saying, let's get back to some more drinking.
Okay, sorry. So one thing I will say, if anyone wants, we have made cocktails as well. One of the ones is because apple season and I harvest a lot of apples, we've also made a cocktail with it with apple juice and cinnamon. So it's a great combination with it as well. So Eastern European style vodka, apple juice, and a little touch of cinnamon on there. And we're going to link all this. I'm going to be, you know, I'm lucky enough to have a lot of cocktails over here waiting as we taste through. We've made some amazing cocktails, and after the whole talk, we're going to link the recipes for these for anyone else who wants to make and enjoy them. So you just have to watch me drink them for now, but later you can also drink them yourselves. So.
Guys, we've had an amazing amount of questions come in already, and some of them are quite relevant to what we're talking about now. So I wondered if it would be worth diving into a couple of them. One of which came into my head as well, because my background is wheat genetics. So like when you were talking about the fields, I was like, ooh, is if you've got a crossbreeding population of rye, and therefore you've got genetically diverse grain as your base, does that change your flavor profile each year? Do you have to go through the tasting process again?
It's a question that comes up all the time. So in commodity, in mass market, in large production, everyone says, how can you guarantee consistency? You know, that's always it. So fine, we like it, but like, guarantee consistency. And I always say, well, no, I have no interest in guaranteeing consistency. Especially what I would like, instead of, and that sounds bad, like it's all going to taste like us because you have these dominant notes. But I would rather celebrate unique vintages or fields than I would have to make the choices to make it all taste the same. So we made that choice with our vodka right early on. We said, do we want to filter all the flavor out and just make it like vodka? Put it in your freezer, it's just vodka. And I said, no, let's celebrate the flavor of it. Let's have something that tastes and feels like something. And if this year, this field tastes amazing, I'd like people to like that. If next year it tastes different, I'd like to celebrate that as well. Like what we're doing with the crossbreeding and with genetic diversity in fields is that fields will do differently. One field that's wet will have a different self-selected grain variety than another field that's really dry, because all these varieties, not all of them are going to do well. So next year when you plant, they're not all going to plant in the same proportions. So we took that a step farther for some of our grain builds. An old method of farming is called maslin, where you plant rye and you plant wheat at the same time, and they have slightly different growing conditions they like. So some years the wheat will outproduce the rye, and other years the rye will outproduce the wheat. So it's not even the genetic diversity of one grain, it's actually the different varieties of grain. Your mash bill changes per year with proportions. And I said, great, let's make whiskey with maslin, and let's celebrate every we follow on. So yeah, celebrate the diversity of it.
Another question was, is Hamblin bread also using the same grain?
Yes, I love them. Kate and Hugo are some of my good friends. They are amazing. We work with them at the farmers markets here. They, you know, I won't say it officially, but I'll say it with you guys. When COVID hit, they're one of the great people I could trade whiskey for bread and flour. Yeast. They're really good friends, and they've worked a lot with John too. And I'll plug them a bit because I know they're also growing their own fields. They're doing the people's population, and they're growing their own unique population of grain in Oxford in a unique environment to then be milled locally and used for their bread. So it's another representation of amazing farming methods and an amazing way of, you know, stepping outside the commodity-based grain kind of system of the world right now. They're amazing. They're doing it right.
And one final one at the moment. David Rickard had a question about the susceptibility of rye to ergot or ergot.
We don't have a problem. So John hasn't had a problem with ergot in his. It's never come up. But also, ergot, you could delve way into this one. It's also it follows really closely with sourdough baking. I think if I'm not mistaken, high acid breaks down ergot anyways, so long fermentations break it down. Honestly, booze is easy. We ferment it and then we boil the hell out of it for a long time, and then we turn it into hyper alcohol. So there's not a lot that comes through that lives or hurts you, besides the alcohol. So we don't have a problem with it. We're not eating it as a biological product, and anything that would be in it would break down anyways.
Wonderful. So we will continue working through your questions as we go, guys. I really appreciate how many of them there are. It's amazing. But yeah, do you guys want to carry on with the next tasting?
Three more to go. All right. What's next on our list? Next on our list, we've got the Oxford Dry. So when we started this whole distillery, and you guys don't wait for me, by the way, you can start tasting it. When we started this distillery, I knew that working with Simon and developing this product, we had Physic, and Physic is this herbal, botanical, big flavored, rich gin, and we had that. And to counteract that, I really wanted something that represented historical gin, which was a big London Dry, which is like simpler botanicals. It's juniper forward, it's citrus. It's not the weird and wonderful. It represents the stills, the grain, everything else. So Oxford Dry, which is our flagship gin, that's what this did. It's the juniper and citrus driven one that you would use in a gin and tonic and a cocktail. And that's kind of what this. It's a little higher proof. We've always done that. And it's again, it's made from the same base of our gin, but it's not the medicinal quality. It's more the classic gin. Like I said, with any gin, you need to tell a story. Oxford, the Physic, it tells the story of a 400-year-old medicinal garden. Oxford Dry tells the story of historical gin. It's juniper, coriander, angelica. It has some local ingredients. It's got a little meadow sweet. It's got a little cubeb to spice it out. But really, it's a classic big London Dry gin.
One great question, which I must admit I've always wondered as well, is what does the dry bit mean in dry gin?
Historically, the classifications for gin have always been, there's been several classifications. Dry gin means that you put everything in the still. So you start with neutral spirit, 96%. All gin starts with high proof vodka. You water it down and you put your botanicals in. So for a dry gin, they all have to go into the still. You distill them, and then you water them down, and you don't add anything after that. In the spirit industry, there's a lot of things you can do. You can buy alcohol and just put oils into it. You could distill a gin and then put a ton of sugar into it and not put it on the label. So it's become a mark of quality that says all that it is botanicals in a still, distilled, and then watered down to proof. So it's just botanical flavored. It means you haven't put anything into it after the fact. You haven't put any rose essence or perfumes or citric or anything that. It's a honest, botanically driven gin. And there's a lot of other classifications for gin, but now it's just come to be known as a mark of kind of production quality. Now for this one, I have a cocktail as well. Because I think we're in England, and with the group we have, I'm sure, tuning into this, people are pretty well aware of sloe gin, and it's the season, it has been lately, where people have been picking sloes. It was an early sloe season this year, a really good sloe season. And we always do a sloe gin here as well. So we take Physic and we take the Oxford Dry, and we do a year maceration on last year's sloes. So this is the first cocktail we've made now with our sloe gin we're going to release and Oxford Dry. So we've done a sloe gin fizz. So we've done a regular lemon, sugar, gin, and a touch of our local sloes. So that's our kind of cocktail we've done with this one.
Just to clarify, for those of us that haven't got the taster kit, we've got 4 tasters that we're talking about this evening, and I've realized we're mentioning them by name, but it will make more sense to the people that have the bottles in front of them. So we started with, oh, the camera's over here, the Oxford vodka. Now we are on the dry gin.
Yep.
We've still got the Physic gin, which I think we'll spend quite a while talking about, and then the Viola in our kits this evening. So that's the order that we're working through this evening, just because I had a few questions about which one we were talking about specifically. So I hope that's cleared that
So
up.
we've started with the base alcohol. So it all starts with the vodka, and it's what we do with it after that. And the vodka comes at 96%. So with the gin, we water it down to 60. We put botanicals in for the Oxford Dry. We redistill it and we water it down. That's our Oxford Dry gin that we've tasted. Which brings us to the next one, which is why we're all here tonight, which is the Physic. And it's good to follow up. If you've got a little left, you can taste the dry gin next to the Physic, and you can really see a difference. I think with anything, you need polarity. You need to have specific and defined categories in what you're tasting or drinking, and that's really why we developed these two products side by side, and one wouldn't exist without the other. This was a counterpoint to this, as well as vice versa. We knew we were doing Weird and Wonderful. We also wanted to do classic. I mean, Physic, of all the things I've done as a distiller, it's one of the things I'm most proud of and really enjoy drinking. So I think we'll give you a taste of it. I mean, right off the bat, you can smell it. It has more herbal notes. It's got sweeter notes. It kind of comes out in the nose. And it has a whole different mouthfeel and herbal flavor to it. Where one is classic, this is, historical. And depth. And we've gone through what's in it, but really it's what shines through with this. You have things like bay, you have gentian, you've got wormwood. Hold on, I'm gonna grab some of these. Wait 1 second.
It's a bit like a gustatorial tour of the Botanic Garden, Corey. All those flavors coming through because of the omission of the orris root. So you're getting all these notes of different botanicals which would be blended if the orris had been put in there.
Oh, absolutely.
You're on a tour of the Botanic Garden in a glass, in effect.
But it's things like this. So I've never in my my many years of gin distilling, like one of the ones that really came out to me is rue. And rue historically has been used in distilling. Historically in England, it's been used in cooking. It's not so much anymore. But if here's some of the rue we collected from the garden this morning. When you taste it, it's bitter and it's unique, and you taste the flavor, and there's so much going on in your mouth where you know it must be medicinal. There has to be something good going on there, because it just tastes like so much complex chemistry in your mouth, and coaxing the flavor from rue into the gin and not having it taste like medicine was the challenge. But that's also what gives it that depth, and the interestingness. And here we got Artemisia absinthium. This is wormwood absinthe.
Rue is an interesting thing because it's also used as a depth flavoring in goulash and stews in Eastern Europe.
Absolutely.
The national plant of Lithuania, which for pub quizzes they might like to note that.
But all of these also, you look back and they all have medicinal uses. They're anti-parasitic, they're anti-fever, they're anti-quag. There's all these things that tie back as well. And I'm the last person that's going to tell you that Physic is going to solve some medical problem you have. But they are all historically, and that's the amazing thing about alcohol, is any historical alcohol you look at, be it vermouth, be it Amaro, be it gin, it always has a tie back to what originally was a medicinal purpose. And as a medicinal purpose that was specific to the local environment, that then became a local product, that then became a spirit that defined that community or that country or that area, And it's that geographical kind of uniqueness of spirits that, I always think it's like cooking, it's like spices. It's like anything that it becomes cultural, but a lot of that started as medicinal.
Exactly, and like we've got Szechuan pepper in the gin, which of course is the basis of all those lovely flavors that you get from Szechuan foods. But just picking up on your point about the rue, for the thing is, rue is a Mediterranean European plant, but it's also the type genus of the great family Rutaceae, which includes all the citrus. So it was classified before in Europe by European botanists before they toured other parts of the world and realized that the citrus plants of undiscovered parts of the world that were all known to the people that lived there and have been used in all sorts of cookery and culinary, included the lemons, the limes, the oranges, etc. But the only one of the few representatives of that great group of plants in Europe was rue. And if you look carefully at the berry, the fruit of a rue, it actually is segmented and looks rather like a tiny little lime or lemon, and it has the same pellucid glands that produce all these.
This is amazing. I'm learning some of the science of this now in our talk.
They're all linked. It's wonderful botany and culinary and distillery uses.
Actually, it's a good segue too, because one of the things that it's almost like cheating is that one of the things that the Botanic Gardens has so prevalent, such a great use for this gin is your citrus collection. You know, the glass houses there, the greenhouses, you have an amazing citrus. And any gin distiller will tell you that, you know, you can have all these roots and berries and things go into it, but the most flavor active compound you can put into it. So the thing that has the most flavor with the least amount of volume is always citrus, you know, because flavor comes from oils and essential oils and all this. So when I found out there was so many citrus at the Botanic Garden, it became the backbone for so much of the recipe. So it's herbal, but if it's just herbal and bitter, it wouldn't taste good. You have to balance it with that citrus note. So, I mean, these are literally picked this morning from there. You've got, you know, grapefruits and calamodium, small oranges and limes. And we have a Japanese bitter orange that's there. We've got, I mean, so many different types of citrus from the Botanic Gardens that go in. And like I said, it's kind of cheating because we're really lucky, because when citrus is in season, we can pick enough citrus for the whole year's production, because it takes one fruit for 400 bottles, you know? So we can, you know, there's enough produced at the Botanic Gardens to actually make thousands of bottles of gin. And it has a huge
perfect segue into a couple of questions, actually, because we're up to 23 people they're coming in.
Oh.
So one of the questions was, or I think two separate ones have come in now, about, is it just botanicals basically from our garden that you utilize, or do you have to kind of add surplus for quantity?
Botanic Gardens do not. So we use tons of juniper, literally tons throughout the year, right? The juniper and coriander are the most by weight in any gin recipe. So we use everything in the recipe. Every one of the botanicals has historically been grown there or harvested from there now. We probably harvest at least half the botanicals from there now. But the other ones, the bulk ones like coriander and, you know, angelica root and juniper, we don't. So we have to buy those organically, as a gin base. But the unique flavor aspects of it, the rue, the wormwood, the Szechuan pepper, the gentian, some of it, the Artemisia cynthium, the Artemisia annum, these are all flavor attributes that come directly from, and all the citrus from the gardens. So half of them probably come directly from the Botanic Gardens. The other half have been grown there historically.
And spiraling back to Orris that you were talking about earlier, we've had one question about how do you spell it, which, to be honest, may be a question multiple people are asking. And also, where does it come from? Why is it mattering in that production of gin so much traditionally? Because this gin doesn't have it in and still definitely tastes ginny. So why is it traditionally included so often?
Orris is super cool. I like Orris. Orris is a rhizome. It's a root. Here's some Orris root here for you. It's usually powdered. Orris is a unique one. Perfumists, if you want to learn to make a good gin, start researching old perfume, because perfumists, you know, it's the same process as gin. What you're trying to do is you're trying to take amazing smells and experiences from nature, from botanical bases, and you're trying to put them into something that you can experience. So whether that's something you taste and experience, or that's something you put on your skin, right? So with a lot of plants and compounds, you know, if you smell a rose, you smell it so prevalently because it's volatile and it's trying to escape. You know, you have all these compounds that are trying to get out, and you're trying to, perfumers found a long time ago, what they're trying to do is find these amazing flavor smells and stick them to you, make them not as volatile. You know, if it smells a lot, it's going to escape really easily. How do you get that into a concentrated form that sticks around? So one thing perfumers found a long time ago with orris is it actually binds to things, and it actually brings the volatility down, and it sticks things together and brings them over in distillation and makes them kind of hang out longer. You know, so orris itself doesn't always taste like that much. I mean, call it synesthesia. I always think it kind of smells and tastes like purple.
Mm.
But what it does is it actually increases the amount of all the compounds and the flavor and taste of the things that you distill in its presence. So when you put it in there, it grabs things around it and it puts it in. It's not simple though. Orris by itself, if you dig up a fresh orris root, you don't get much. You actually have to age it for a couple of years. You have to oxidize it. You know, this is a dry, big orris root. Really, most people use powdered orris root because it's the aging oxidation that actually changes it into something else that then you use in distillation. It's kind of Parma Violet a little bit, but really what it does is it grabs everything else and it pulls it together and lets it all kind of like stick around.
I think a couple questions have come in that you may be able to answer for us, Simon. One, why don't we grow orris root at the garden, or why does it not have any other sort of medical use that would have put it in there historically? And then also, does it make a difference if the citrus fruit is grown in Oxford compared to somewhere hot like Italy?
Well, orris has been grown in the Botanic Garden, and it's not that we choose not to grow it. It's just not grown there at the moment. Mm-hmm. But citrus has always been grown at the garden right from the earliest days, when we had one of the first, what you might call greenhouses or orangeries, as they were then called in the 18th century. And it's also always been associated with Oxford. And we have a tremendous variety that are grown under glass. But Corey's already mentioned one that you can actually grow in your own garden. It's the one citrus that is hardy, and that is the Japanese bitter orange, Poncirus trifoliata, which I'm holding up now, which
they're fuzzy.
Which you can see if you visit the Botanic Garden now, the tree is actually dripping with these wonderful oily skinned citrus, and like lemons, like lime, they have spines, but trifoliata means that it has three leaflets in its leaf, and you can go to the garden and see that. And if you want to grow that in your own gardens, you can, and you can use it to make a very interesting jelly and do all sorts of other flavorings. So you can actually have citrus in your own garden with Poncirus.
I'll just say, as a distiller, I mean, that's the rabbit hole I go down, is citrus, because citrus is just, I mean, you go to the supermarket, you've got limes, lemons, oranges, grapefruit, maybe a pomelo once in a while, some easy peelers. When you look into the world of citrus, it's like there are hundreds of varieties of citrus out there in the world. You know, there are things like bergamot, for instance, you know, what goes into Earl Grey tea. There are, you know, lime quats, and there are Buddha's hands, and there are hundreds of varieties of citrus, and each one of them is so flavor active and so unique and interesting from a distilling point of view, and before as a bartending point of view. That is just like, you know, being in a candy store. Like, you're able to take a rind of something and just express its flavor immediately in the form of an oil that you can experience. I mean, citrus is it really is like, you know, like I said, the bread and butter of gin making and a lot of other you know, flavorings. It's unbelievable, and so much of it too, because of the way we experience things through buying at Waitrose or wherever we shop. So much of it's unknown to people. You know, when you taste these other things, it's like discovering a new color. You're like, I had no idea this experience was out there, and now that I have had it, you know, Chinotto oranges, you know, like the you know, that depth of flavor that once you've had it, you know, you want it and you can't find it somewhere else. You know, it's that like unique aspect. It's just amazing. I mean, citrus is
Campari.
Yeah, exactly.
And this flavor complexity it is also true of the taxonomic complexity. The genus citrus is amazingly diverse, and it's because they hybridize so prodigiously, and it's one of the most difficult groups to actually track down the evolutionary history of. And hopefully in the next few years, there'll be an amazing monograph that comes out of the whole citrus group by probably the greatest botanist living at the moment, David Mabberley, who was here at Oxford a number of years ago, now based in Australia, who's been working on the classification, working out the evolution of the whole of the citrus group for more than 30 years. And the labours of his work will hopefully be coming out fairly soon.
I would love to read that.
Yeah.
So just to digress just a second. So in honor of actually how Physic even started and how the whole project and probably the distillery even got off the ground, for our drink for this one, we actually made a beautiful Physic Negroni. And that's I think it's one of the drinks that I'll say honestly, when I made Physic, there are ingredients in there specifically that we included because they're in really good vermouth. You know, the gentian, the wormwood, those flavors to make into a good Negroni. We garnished it with a bay leaf because it's also in there. I think it's one of the best uses for Physic. It really makes one of the most amazing Negronis.
Yes, I'm sorry, social distancing and all that has kept us apart this evening, Corey, because normally we'd be doing this together.
Have 1, 2, or 5 of these together, absolutely.
You've got the wretched Negroni and I haven't, so
you're just going to have to watch me drink it.
Drink it for me now, will you? And
we've had quite a few questions about whether there is a particular citrus that you would recommend as a garnish for Physic gin in particular.
I would. So one of the it's a sneaky one in there because it's not what you think of as dominant, but it's actually very like it's present in there. Is grapefruit. The grapefruit from the garden is amazing. I mean, it's these guys here, and it's just in your earlier question about, you know, can you grow good citrus? It's not that you're growing the citrus in England, it's that you're growing the citrus in glass houses. So the climate and the conditions are actually really good for citrus. And I just smell it now, the grapefruit is amazing. And that's one, it's a sneaky one in the Physic, but when you balance it, it works really well. So I would, if you're drinking a gin and tonic, a Negroni, if you don't use bay, I would recommend a bit of grapefruit.
And is lemon traditionally added to gin because citrus is such an essential component and it's the most common?
Lemon is. Lemon's a tricky one. Too much lemon doesn't taste like lemon. Lime is in there. Orange is also really commonly in there. Bitter orange is probably more common. Most recipes call for bitter orange. And bitter orange, it's what most people would think, it's what you make marmalade out of. You know, it's a Seville orange. And when you distill it, it comes over less as bright citrus and more like vanilla orange note, you know, like body. So it's really, citrus is a weird one. Different citrus, you use too much and it doesn't work. You use too little, it doesn't work. You have to use the right amount, and they all add different aspects. Lime is great. You associate lime with gin and tonics, but if you distill too much lime, it tastes bitter. We work with a citrus now, which blew my mind when I stumbled across it. It's something called a Jara. It's an Indian Bangladeshi citrus, Jara. It's got other names for it. It's like the best floral lemon lime, beautiful citrus you've ever tasted. We use it in our Ashmolean and some other products, and it is just beautiful floral, like deep lime flavor and lemon flavor to it. Yeah, we could spend a whole other night on citrus, and I'd be happy to, wax poetic.
Just picking up on that in terms of a little bit of the botany, the biology of these things for people, just for everyone's information. The key thing with getting these oils out of citrus is to cut through the skin, the rind. And if you look carefully, you'll see these little sort of spots on the surface of the skin, and you cut through those. They're called pellucid glands, and that's where all the oils are located. So you don't want to get anywhere near the pith of the
it's a really good point. So we
just cut through, and you have to be very careful in cutting a thin bit of rind, and that's where you get that's why you do the zest.
Mm-hmm. So it's a good point. So when you order, from a distiller's point of view, when you order, say, bitter orange, and it's a commodity, it's a big product, it's in all gins, a lot of big gins, and you order it from Spain, but it comes as a dried whole peel with a pith on it. Now, I've always found that distilling with it is a real issue because it has all of that pith.
Yes.
So we switched here at the distillery, where every year now we order organic, fresh bitter oranges. Now, if you guys want to have a fun experience, you can come here in late January and February, and you can help out with the distillers, because we get about 100 kilos or 200 kilos probably this year of fresh bitter oranges, and we have to peel them all individually and dry them. And it smells amazing, and we're drying them, but I don't want that pith. Now, if anyone wants to use the rest of those oranges for something, you're also more than welcome to come and pick them up. But it is true, you only want that oil section. The other thing with citrus is that it's one of the most challenging things when you're making a gin, because when you're making a gin, you have these cut points. Like the first thing that comes off the still is, we call it the heads. And if you were to add water to it, it's very, very cloudy. So it's a lot of compounds that are very volatile that come over that you don't want in your final product. Then you get the hearts cut of the gin. Now, unfortunately, there's this gray area between the heads that are very cloudy and the hearts, which are your gin, and a lot of really good citrus sits in that area. So sometimes you find yourself making these choices of, do I want this beautiful citrus flavor, and do I mind if my gin has a little bit of haze? Or do I want to distill past that haze into clean gin and not have that citrus flavor? And some distillers have said, I don't mind if it's cloudy. We love this flavor. And as a gin distiller, that's something you always have to work with your recipe, is how does the citrus you use affect the clarity of your gin and how you distill it?
So I'm a little bit conscious on time and making sure that we get round to the last tasting vial that is in our pack, and that we can get to some of the bigger questions that I've been avoiding for now, because I feel like we almost need several Zoom meetings to get through this. Some of them I'm sure we could talk about for hours, and they're really broad, which would be great to get to some of those at the end. So if we move on to the Veuve Viola.
The Veuve Viola, it's a spring gin. We made this as a celebration of spring. We made this as a celebration of flowers and botanicals and all of these things. And just for fair warning, I swore I would never make a purple or pink gin, and I did it for one of our events, and it was so good that I had no choice but to continue to make it. Yeah, even I agreed. Okay, fine. I don't like gimmicky gin, but this is really, really good, and we'll make it in a way that's not gimmicky. So this is a base. It's got that jar of lime. I was talking about the jar of lemon. It's always this way. It's always the ones that look kind of gimmicky. They're actually twice as hard to make. So for us, we take a beautiful gin and then pour it over a bed, and I mean a big, huge bed of organic roses, slowly to dissolve the rose essence. And then it gets infused with an organic pea flower, which gives it its beautiful purple color. It's a wonderful gin that we've accentuated with a lot of great flowers. So it's good on its own, but what I really like is in the gin and tonic. So we have a great, it's a Physic gin and tonic. But if you put a little bit of a, well, let's see in here, you can add a top to it. If you want to get sciencey about it too, that color also changes. It's a pH indicator, so it will turn pink with acids. So with tonic, with lime, it's also a bit of a color changing gin. So if you have a good tonic, your whole drink will end up actually turning a bit pink. I love it because as a from a bartending point of view for a long time, you're looking for presence, you're looking for a beautiful presentation. From a distiller's point of view, you want to make a beautiful product, and we can stand behind it as a honest, organic, non-gimmicky product. All I have to say is that at the end of the day, it's not uncommon to see a lot of distillers standing around drinking pink gin and tonics because it tastes really good. And that's what I'm saying about it. It's great for cocktails, but also just for drinking as a gin tonic, it adds a lot. And that's the final gin we have. You can taste it by itself, and it's a great floral gin, but really it comes into its own when you mix it, and it pops those floral, that rose, the all those really citrusy and floral flavors out.
Yeah, I think it needs a bit of fizz, doesn't it?
It's a stunning color, though.
Mm.
And it really is. So one of the challenges, and again, back from a science point of view, is that you look in making a product, it's actually very hard to find a color that's both ethanol stable and light stable. So you have a lot of things where you'll say, oh, it's an amazing color, I'm going to put that in there, and it colors it, but then you realize over time that ethanol will dissolve the color, and then light will dissolve the color, and what went in as a beautiful product will actually end up being a brown or off or a weird color. The flowers we use in this actually are very, very stable, which is rare. So you can create this beautiful purple that will stay purple and flavor your drinks and color your drinks and make a visually stunning drink as well. So again, it's a product I swore I would never make, but it's one that I'm really proud of, and that actually probably, besides the Physic, is one that I enjoy drinking more than a lot of other things.
Your absinthe was pretty good last year as well.
Oh man,
Corey, tell us a bit about your absinthe.
So that's that's what we have. So we do have. I've actually got some in the fridge here. It's another one. It's a challenge because the coloring. I got my start at some people know I got my start in distilling in the absinthe world. I mean I started bootlegging absinthe by making my own stills in my loft in Brooklyn and making it, from scratch and building my own stills. So it has a really good place in my heart is absinthe. And we've done it here through the distillery. We've used wormwood from the Botanic Gardens. We make it in very small batches and very limited batches, and we only release it when it's of a quality that I really, really like. So the color's green, but it's a challenge. You use a lemon balm to color it, and that's light sensitive. So it's brilliant green to begin with, but if you don't treat it well, it will turn brown. But we have our own secret stash. We sell out of it every time we make it when we release it. But we've got a couple bottles left here. But it is, again, it's representing local botanicals, representing, our handmade production, and making a product that kind of transcends a commercial product into something that's just a beautiful object in its own right.
Are you guys ready for some questions?
Yes, please. As I drink my purple drink.
So I do apologize in advance to people if we don't get through all of them, but we're going to give it
How about
a
Lauren,
go.
we tag team this?
Yeah?
Okay.
I'll scan through one and you can scan the next, and we'll do it that way.
So we've got a couple of questions about the career pathway. Like, how do you become a master distiller? Did you train as a chemist?
I'm the worst person to ask. I'm the best and the worst. So you always hear about following your dreams. Do what you love, right? Wholeheartedly agree. So I hopped the train to New York one day and became moved out there at a young age and worked with hotels and bars and got myself into the drinks industry through that aspect. So 10 years in New York, I was managing hotel bars, mixology, that whole heavy cocktail industry. The whole time I was doing that, I also ran an illegal speakeasy venue in Brooklyn. Like, I had a floor of a building as an art gallery and music venue, and we did massive shows, and I built my own stills to make absinthe. I don't know if you'd like me saying it now. One of my good friends that I did a restaurant with is a guy named Dave Wondrich, who's he's like the writer for drink. He's like an OG of the cocktail world. He's the drink writer for Esquire. He's done a ton of books. We had a Sazerac on our menu, and he was making the absinthe for it, and he was infusing it, and it was pretty bad. So one day I went back to my own art space and said, I think I can make a better absinthe than Dave Wondrich, and I built a still and started distilling absinthe, and that got me into distilling. You know, that was my like impetus to get into that world of creation as opposed to selling. So it was working the spirit industry. It was bootlegging. So I started making absinthe and selling it to private clients just at a waiting list for these art projects of handmade absinthe with these hand etched glass. And I'd get old 100-year-old whiskey bottles and medicine bottles and dip them. It was just this labor of love. And at one point I said, what do I want to do more? Do I want to make beautiful booze, or do I want to work in beautiful restaurants? And I said, I'd rather make beautiful booze. So I applied for the program at Heriot Watt and was accepted, and went to do my master's in distilling in Scotland, even though I didn't have a lot of undergrad. They rolled the dice for me. I stayed there for, I did my master's, I graduated with honors, and then they kept me on as a visiting scholar. So I was able to do research for about 3 or 4 years in my lab, doing yeast research, recipe development, all sorts of kind of fun science stuff. And then through that, just kind of fell into a couple of distilleries. So I started a rum distillery in Scotland with some people, so Dark Matter Rum, and then Silent Pool Gin, and then left all of those to start this. So it's really just, honestly, it's following what you want to do, what your passion is, and making it, what you do every day.
But the kind of chemistry, science kind of background, but kind of moving towards...
For me, it's this beautiful, it's this absolute marriage between geeky science, where you geek out on the science of it all, and the engineering. Like if I could go back and do it all again, I would get a mechanical and fluid engineering degree. Because having designed stills now, I would be like, wow, if I actually knew CAD and knew all this stuff, it would be so much better. But like having the ability, like a science background to know how things should work, having the flavor background of what do people want to drink, and then just having the creative, like throw caution to the wind of what do we want to make. Taking all those together, it's the perfect job for me. I mean, there is no better job. I get science, I get creativity, I get art, and I get booze, all wrapped up in something someone wants to pay me for.
It does sound super corny, but the bottom line is work hard, follow your dreams. I think, Lauren, do you have a question?
Stand by it. Yeah. Don't settle. Like if you like something, just do it, because there's enough people out there that probably like it too, that you can make it, what you do every day, because that's what's important. Spend your days well.
So the next question's there's a couple about the creation process for Physic Gin. So my understanding is you guys went through like 20 different iterations of the Physic Gin together. Is that?
I mean, so literally it was the most challenging and interesting and scientific gin I've ever made. Usually I've made a lot of third-party gins for people. So when someone wants to make a gin, I say, okay, what story do you want to tell? Let's tell it to your beginning. And you have in your mind, you have ratios. You say, okay, you want a floral gin, you want a classic gin, you want a herbal gin. I'll use these different ingredients. But Physic threw all that out the window. It said, we're going to do a medicinal gin from a 400-year-old botanic garden. So we started from basic. We literally took like 100 different cuttings and distilled them. Actually, in the stills you see behind me here, in 200 milliliters. We put something, we macerate it, I would distill it, and I would taste it and see, is this gin positive? Does this have aspects that could be used in the gin? And that took months, all of these small distillations. And we had this just table full of all these little vials of like everything we distilled. And we smelled through and we go like, what should go in here? Is this going to build the recipe? Is it going to take away? Some of it, you'd be like, this tastes amazing. This is going to be awesome. And you distill it and you're like, this is absolutely horrible. We're not using this, this is like ruined everything. So it really was this whole journey of exploration on these botanicals. And it's because they're botanicals that aren't traditionally used in gin. So,
and were you changing it like one ingredient at a time, or were you sometimes gambling?
Any gin recipe, from my point of view, the way it works, you start with a story and you have an idea in your head about what you want to create. The feeling you want someone to have when they have your gin. So that's what's in your head when you're doing it, and then you start looking at the ingredients to see what's going to create that. So you do all the individual botanicals, could be 100 botanicals. You put them into groups of what works and what doesn't, what's citrus, what's floral, what's earthy, what's bitter. And then from those, you say, okay, fine, we'll narrow it down to 50 ingredients. Let's start to build some recipes. So we'll build some recipes that have different aspects, heavy floral, heavy, From those recipes, you then start narrowing it down to what works and what doesn't. It's a lot of, having other people do blind tastings and saying, what did you like in this? What did you not like? And you end up whittling down these recipes until you get to something that represents the vision that you had in your head in the beginning. Are people experiencing what you wanted from those botanicals when you started on the journey about, like, when you defined what you want people to have? And then the hard part begins, because you have a small scale version and now you've got to scale it up. So you go from 2 liters and then you might take it to 5 liters. And then you've got to take it to 200 liters. So every time you step up your recipe, it actually changes all the ratios of your ingredients. And then you might even take it up to 600 liters, so it's a lot of work. And you might actually, every step of the way, you might get it wrong 10 times, So you've really got to, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort, and it's a lot of experimentation. And Physic was by far the most challenging and the longest gin that I've ever worked on, because of some of the unique ingredients.
I think that scale-up process that you've just been talking about is the purview of chemical engineers. They do that sort of thing all the time. So, it's another avenue to kind of potentially pursue and get into this area. We had a couple of questions earlier on about rye, the kind of diversity of the kind of grains and the kind of fields and all that kind of stuff. So we've got a few questions around how many different types of grain do you use or could you use to make vodka or gin? But then also, as you were saying, over time, the kind of field matures, develops, and kind of diversifies its own kind of genetic profile. And there was a couple of questions, and we've answered some of those, but one of the questions was, do you think Toad will get to a point when it makes a vintage vodka?
So vintage is weird with vodka. I mean, legally, at least if you export it, vintage is a hard one, because vintage usually starts when it's in a barrel, right? So you can talk about the harvest. What's probably going to be more accurate or more influential is, over time, we'll be talking about the fields, because the growing conditions of the UK will kind of be the same, but the actual environmental and growing conditions of the fields, based on drainage, based on where they are, will be different, and that's what's going to self-select. So it's the unique environments that they're growing in. And that's the beauty of polycultures, right? Is that if you have a monoculture and you plant it in many different environments, it's not going to do well everywhere. It's going to do poorly in some places and really well in other places. And what you try to do is create the best environments, the fields where you have fertilizer and the pesticides, to make a field that's right for your monoculture. With polycultures, you're putting multiple grains in different environments and letting them evolve. So I would say it's less about environmental changes and more about location and different fields. And I think what you'll see more with us, and probably less with the vodka and the gin, just because it's so heavily distilled. But when you get into the whiskey, which accentuates those flavors, the grain flavors and stuff, you'll see more individual fields, individual yields. It's more like a wine where you can really talk about the year, the time, the climate that goes into it. So vodka is the challenge. I would say whiskey's a better expression of that.
Okay, people might be familiar with the kind of vintage champagne, for instance. So you might have the champagne houses that produce the kind of,
grapes are a great example, right? Grapes are directly influenced by the environment that they're in. Like if it's a long summer, then grapes get better sugar. If it's a short summer, you get more acid. Whereas grapes are a little different. What you'll find is actually you'll self-select for varieties. So it's like our Maslin blend, right? So if you have rye and wheat in the same field, your whiskey mash bill will actually physically change based on the climate of the year. So if you have multiple types of grain, that will change a lot because they're higher impact from the flavor from the different varieties of grain. It's honestly, to be honest, I could answer this question as if I knew specifically what the answer was. In truth, I'm going on this journey as much as everyone else that's going to enjoy our product. I'm sitting there going, what's it going to do? Is this going to be amazing? Like, what is this field going to create? What's that field going to create? What happens if it's a really crap year? Like, I'm sitting there also watching what's going to happen, because no one has done this and no one is doing this. So we're at the forefront of this, and anyone who's enjoying our product is also going on that journey with us. So,
and if I can just chip in here on this journey and the people that are coming in and becoming interested, we're also getting a lot of interest from people that work on the genomics of wheat and cereals as well, and working with John Letts with all his heritage varieties. We're looking to be working with cereal geneticists, particularly at Bristol University, who've been involved in sequencing the wheat genome, to actually look at these ancient varieties and compare their genomes to the modern varieties, and just see a little bit more about this incredible diversity and how it might help develop modern strains of cereals that can contribute to humanity's quest to grow crops that are for the future. And so this has a huge amount of scientific interest as well from the genomics community who work on cereals.
I love it. And that's the one thing I love about science too, is that in many ways, science explains things, but in also many ways, science explains things that you also know intrinsically. You're like, we know this works, and now let's figure out why it works, and maybe we can make it work a bit better. And whiskey's a great example of that. Like, you put everything into a cask and you're tossing it into a wooden barrel, and then you're going to wait a while and it's going to come out tasting amazing later. And you spend years and years with science describing uniquely why that happens. At the end of it, you go, yeah, cool. So we put it in a barrel and then it tastes amazing years and years later. And I think, it's a unique thing with this grain too, is that John has known for years, like, you have these polycultures, they evolve, they create sustainable environments. We know it works. Now let's look into the science of what aspects of that are making it, and off and used individually, or whether you have to keep that information as part of the whole, as the ecosystem of the grain. I guess that's what you'll see. It's also one of the dangers with science too, is that you take these little, the individual bits of it outside of the whole of, of the process.
Yeah, my genetics background makes me really want to get my hands on the DNA that you've got in those fields and run some markers through them, because traditionally when you're looking at sort of wheat genetics from a food population, you're looking to stabilize genes that you're introducing or bringing from outside sources for increased disease tolerance or increased salt tolerance, or something that has like a definitive plan. But there's not many studies that have been done from a biodiversity point of view to look at like how you can increase a field biodiversity by growing in the way that you guys have been talking about tonight. And it would be really
so cool. That's the problem with monocultures, right? Is you have something you can analyze and control, but if you take 1,000 varieties and toss that into the mix, where does that
it causes a statistical nightmare. That's what happens, and it's making me nervous.
Yeah. So the thing with I bring it back to it too, because it makes you take that leap of faith that what you do now may not be the right way to do it. Saying, do you have to rotate crops? Do you have to work for 3 years to get one good year? Can you get a lower yield and plant the same things? So for 100 years we've gone one way, and science builds on science. You stand on the shoulders of, and it goes and you make something. But really, if you look back and you change your whole idea of what you should do, and I think it opens up new things, and that's a lot of John's farming, is looking back into it and saying, actually, you know, the medium yields, the yields of his fields, if you don't rotate, but you get a lower yield every year, are actually much higher than every 3 years getting a big yield. You know, over 5 years you get more.
So thinking about yield, there's a question that might be for Simon. Just someone was curious to know about what kind of fertilizers, composts, and kind of soil enrichments.
So the thing with heritage grains, and this is whether you really, against why you have to take away what you think of farming, where you have to have inputs. So grain didn't evolve with inputs, right? No grain evolved saying you've got to put a lot of fertilizer on it. You might have grazing animals doing it, but our grain, like we said before, it's 6 foot tall, right? So if you put nitrogen on it, any kind of fertilizer, we have to plant our grain in poor fields, because nitrogen and fertilizer makes it so tall that it just falls over. So our biggest yields are on the worst fields. And it's evolved for that. So you have low nitrogen yields, or necessity. So you don't fertilize, you get the right size, and you have undercrops, and that becomes a sustainable ecosystem for grain. But if you fertilize, or if you use it in a field that has had fertilizer, it gets too tall, it falls over, and it doesn't work.
Okay. There is also a question about the geometry of the glass that you might be drinking. So just to completely pivot, I've been drinking out of a martini glass because that's what I pulled off the shelf quickly. Yep. Lauren's got
just a wine glass. I'm not fancy. I only have wine glasses at home, or pint glasses.
And yeah, that's a whiskey glass, isn't it, Corey? That So
these are the Glencairn glasses. These are the so these became the standard. They're like if you're in the wine, if you do your wine trainings or whatever, your ISOs. What it does is it creates an environment here that allows it to evaporate, but then concentrates those aromatics, right? And that's the theory. If you have a big glass that goes out, you're losing that. I did a lot of work with Harriet Watt, where you do statistical analysis in like tastings and all the rest, right? So really, if we were doing this right, we'd be using dark glasses. They'd have lids on them. You might even have some headphones on, you know, and they'd be lower alcohol. But even with these, you can put, if you pour it and you want to put a lid on it, it'll save up for a bit, and you can nose it. Now, my issue is we're tasting it, that's fine. These glasses are great for it, and they're great for whiskey as well. But in truth, no one goes home and makes a delicious drink in this glass. You know, we should be making booze that tastes good in your martini glass, or a highball, or whatever else. You know, yes, if you want to specifically taste it, don't get too geeky about any of it. I mean, don't get too pretentious about any of your glassware, whatever you're using. It's going to taste good if it's good.
We are approaching the end of our session, so I was wondering for the last little bit if we could do like quick fire questions that aren't so anecdotal, because some of the ones we've got left are a little bit shorter. So Simon, I know I saw this at the Gardens, but is there a list of the 25 botanicals somewhere on our site, or is it on the Toad website that people could look into for the Physic Gin?
I'm not absolutely sure. I mean, I've got the list in, as Corey has. He's got it in front of him too.
No.
Here's one.
We actually have it on the website, or whether it is it a secret, Corey?
So
have we accidentally
I've always said, like, if it's what's your secret ingredient? Honestly, if I gave you a recipe for bread, everyone's going to make it differently. Yeah. Probably, like, it's how you distill it, it's how you make it. I could give you all the ingredients and proportions, and you'd make something completely different than we would make. I'm not, I don't think there's any secret to the recipe or the botanicals. I think we should, all of them have a unique place in the gin and the history of the garden. So I think they're listed, and I think I'm happy to share them.
We'll do that. We'll do that. That's a very good suggestion. Thank you.
I mean, there was a question in the box about the rye vodka, for instance, is that someone has a bottle from a few years ago and a bottle from now, and it just tastes different. Not being precious about the kind of vintage year, the botanicals will change depending on how they're kind of blended and the year. So,
it does. I mean, it's the problem, not the problem, it's the issue. So we're a small distillery, everything we do is small. Every batch is different. Everything you drink is the accumulation of several batches. If you're in a large distillery, you have thousands and thousands of liters, and you have a lot of it, and you get a medium. You get a product that is consistent. Now, we use natural fermentation. So we don't boil our grains. We put yeast in, we put this natural grain, natural bacteria, lactic acid, distilling, all the conditions that it goes in are going to make it slightly different. I made a decision early on that I'm not going to get too hung up on absolute consistency, because not only is the grain different, but the chemical composition, the biological composition of the fermentation, of all of that is going to change based on the batch and the season. So, if I would say, if someone had a batch they didn't like, I'd be more than happy to replace it with a bottle they would. And I would say that I'm glad. My other thing I'd say is that if, what you don't ever want to have is mediocrity. You don't want to make something that a third of the people really like and 2/3 of the people think is horrible, because I know we did it right and was unique. So again, we are a company, we always want to keep people happy. And if someone has a bottle they don't like, I will happily replace it with a bottle they do like. Otherwise, I just, I would encourage people to experience the unique aspects of the whole, of our whole process and what it creates. And
Sorry, Corey, I'd like to kind of ask you guys now about a whiskey that the Gardens and Toad may be bringing out.
That?
Well,
That's so cool.
well done, Lauren. This is getting towards the end.
I need a whiskey, Simon, like a good whiskey would just finish off this tasting set wonderfully.
It's going to be the most unique whiskey
you know where to come.
Literally the most unique and interesting whiskey you've ever had. It's got fantasy, it's got history, it's got historical aspects, it's got organic aspects. It is the coolest whiskey that I've ever worked on, and I don't know how much we can talk about it. It's got orcs. There are orcs and elves.
Let's just say it is a whiskey that has been sitting in various oak casks at Toad for a number of years now, since the inception of Toad, one of the earliest laid down whiskey projects. And it is the whiskey for the 400th anniversary of the Botanic Garden next year. And one cask contains 400 bottles approximately. So 400 bottles of this wonderful whiskey produced by the Oxford Artisan Distillery will celebrate 400 years of the Botanic Garden next year. And we are calling it Black Pine Whiskey.
It's from Middle Earth.
Because there was once a famous black pine tree in the Botanic Garden that split apart in a storm in 2014 and is now no more. But those of you who know Lord of the Rings and Tolkien and all that will know that that tree was much loved by Tolkien, who visited the garden many times. And there's a famous picture of him with that tree. And the tree, the whiskey, will honor that association, but I'm not sure how much we'll be allowed to say about it.
I know it. It's so cool.
In terms of our marketing.
When might we be expecting? We say it's coming out to celebrate the 400th, which is in July. When are we anticipating it will come out around the same time, or would it be available on the run up?
I think that depends on when Corey and others at the Oxford Artisan Distillery decide to tap it off the barrel, so to speak. It will need to sit there as long as possible to get all the oaky flavors, because it will be a relatively young whiskey as whiskies go, but it will be a whiskey because of its sit in the.
But it's another perfect example of working at the Botanic Gardens where, historically, well, not historically, ever, black pine has never been used in the maturation of whiskey. So we're learning now how to take the flavors we want out of pine and integrate them into rye in a way that not only, represents the different historical aspects, but also makes something you really want to drink and enjoy. and that's the challenge, and that's the fun part of the job, and that's everything else. It's taking all those things and making something that someone else is going to go, wow, this is awesome, and I get it. I get that black pine, I get the rye, I get the historical aspect and the caramelization. Like, it's building that product that represents all those aspects, and that's what we're doing now. And I think it's going to be a really amazing, fun whiskey because of that challenge.
Yeah, and the stoppers,
I mean, come on.
The stoppers will have a little bit of the original in response to some of the questions that I see coming in. The stoppers will have a small piece of the original black pine in them, and some bottles will be in boxes that are made from the wood of the pine. And in response to some other questions, yes, we do have offspring of the famous black pine that we will be planting in the garden, and they're growing very well now. And so the legacy of the black pine will continue at the garden and elsewhere for the future, and certainly through this lovely whiskey that Corey and everyone has been creating.
Well, I think that may be a perfect point to kind of draw tonight to a close. I'm sorry to everybody whose question that we haven't been able to get to directly. If anybody wants to tweet anything, either at Toad or at us, or send anything via Instagram, we will do our best to get back to you. Simon, can I just check? I thought that pine tree in the walled garden was the one. I know it's considerably shorter than it was. Is that not the same tree? Am I getting confused? Because I'm new, everybody.
No, there's a black pine near the Botanic Garden, but the whole of the one that was famous for Tolkien being pictured with it has gone now.
Oh, I apologize to the person who I told it was still standing and just shorter. It's not there.
No, it's not. But anyway, this was a really, really fun point to end on. There were so many more questions, so many more comments, and so much more we could have talked about tonight and commented on and waxed lyrical and sipped more and mixed more and more. But we've got to finish at some point, and that point is about now. So thanks so much, everybody, for kind of being involved in this. It's been a really difficult 6-8 months of living in an isolated world. Tonight felt fun, connected together, and friendly and enjoyable. So thanks so much for kind of being part of it. Simon, Corey, a huge amount of knowledge. Lauren, thanks so much for sharing it. In your inboxes, you'll get an email asking for some feedback. And of course, tonight you have come along to this thing for free, and the festival uses pay what you decide. So if you'd like to make a donation, it will mean that we can continue running events a bit like this in the future, whether or not we're in lockdown or we can do things in the physical world. We will also be able to send a list of ingredients and also some cocktail recipes by email. That's going to come across in a few days' time. I've been enjoying my, or finished it now, I've been enjoying my, whatever it is, it's the Vermouth Campari gin. What's that thing called? Negroni. And also, yeah, my gin and tonics and things. I've got a few more bits of gin left. Simon's got some gin, there's some slow gin over here. Corey's got tons behind him. Enjoy drinking, obviously sensibly, and enjoy the rest of the festival. We're here for another week or so, and I'm sure we'll be running one of these again in the future. Again, thanks so much, everyone, for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good evening. Bye.